At 3:30 in the afternoon on a Monday in December of 1963, the men coming off shift walked out through Gate 1 on Sample Street in South Bend, Indiana, and learned from a newspaper being sold at the gate that their company was closing. Studebaker had been building things in that town for 111 years. It had survived the Civil War. It had survived the Great Depression. It had survived 2 world wars. And now, in the richest decade the country had ever known, with Americans buying more new cars than at any moment in human history, it was finished. Here is the part that should not make any sense. Studebaker was not killed by foreign competition. It was not killed by a public that had stopped wanting its cars. The decision to end it was made by a small group of men sitting in its own boardroom, who had quietly concluded that the company would be worth more if it stopped building automobiles altogether. If you are watching this on your phone right now, tap the like button on the screen. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to be told. To understand how a company that old could die that fast, you have to go back to what it was long before it ever built a car. Studebaker did not start in Detroit. It started in a blacksmith shop on the corner of Michigan and Jefferson in South Bend, Indiana, in 1852, run by a family of brothers who made wagons. They were very good at it. They built wagons for farmers heading west and wagons for the Union Army, and by the end of the century, Studebaker was the largest maker of horse-drawn vehicles in the world. Then they did the one thing almost no other wagon maker ever managed to do. They let go of the horse. Studebaker built its first electric car in 1902 and its first gasoline car in 1904. And while hundreds of carriage firms died clinging to the past, Studebaker made the leap to the automobile and lived through it. That was the promise the name carried for the next 50 years. Not the cheapest car and not the flashiest one, but a car built by people who had been making things Americans trusted for longer than most companies had been alive at all. It was, as one of its own slogans put it, the common sense car. Your grandfather believed that, and he had good reason to. Studebaker had already outlived the wagon, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars. There was no obvious reason on earth it should not outlive him too. By 1950, Studebaker was building cars faster than it ever had in 100 years of business. 343,000 of them left South Bend that year. The company held more than 4% of the entire American car market, and it had gotten there first. When the war ended, every other manufacturer was still selling warmed-over pre-war designs. Studebaker was the first company in America to put a genuinely new post-war car in a showroom, and the whole country noticed. The car that did it had a nose like a bullet. Officially, it was the Champion and the Commander. Everyone else just called it the Bullet Nose because of the chrome spinner that sat dead center in the grille. And for a few years, it was one of the most recognized shapes on any American road. If you ever rode in the back seat of one of those cars as a boy, on a 2-lane highway before the interstate existed, you already know what Studebaker meant to the people who bought it. It was not the cheapest car you could buy. It was priced right alongside Pontiac and Oldsmobile and Buick, a step above the low-priced Fords and Chevrolets, and people paid it gladly because a Studebaker felt like it had been designed by someone who actually cared how it looked. Someone had. The design studio of Raymond Loewy shaped these cars, and in 1953, it produced a long, low, clean coupe that people still argue is one of the most beautiful cars America ever built. To make them, South Bend ran day and night. Walk onto the floor of Building 84, and the smell hits you first. Hot metal off the stamping presses, the sting of cutting oil, and fresh lacquer drifting down from the paint line. The sound is the percussion of the presses and the steady rhythm of impact wrenches moving down the line. 1 million square feet of factory floor. 24,000 men and women across 3 shifts, clocking in to the same whistle at 6 in the morning that their fathers had answered before them. A man could put in 20 years on that floor, buy a house on those wages, and watch his own son clock in beside him. Model year after model year, the town and the company were the same thing. And here is the part almost nobody outside the accounting office understood. Even at the very top, even in its best year, Studebaker was paying the highest labor costs in the entire automobile industry. As long as the post-war boom lasted and every car it built could be sold the moment it was finished, the problem stayed hidden. But the boom would not last forever. And when it ended, that one buried number was going to come due all at once. The end did not look like an ending. It looked like a company fighting for its life. In 1962, a new president named Sherwood Egbert threw everything Studebaker had left at one last idea. He called it the Avanti. It was a low, supercharged, fiberglass coupe that Studebaker advertised, truthfully, as the fastest production car in America. Egbert wanted disc brakes and superchargers, and a reason for the whole country to fall in love with Studebaker all over again. He was a former Marine, and he fought for that car even as the cancer that would eventually kill him was already taking hold. And this is the cruel part. While Egbert was fighting to save the company by building it a future, the men on his own board had already decided the company did not have one. They were not looking at the Avanti. They were looking at a single number. Studebaker had to sell 282,000 cars a year just to break even. That was the arithmetic left over from a disastrous merger with Packard, another dying American name, back in 1954, combined with labor costs that were still the highest in the industry. 282,000 cars a year. In most of its final years, Studebaker did not come anywhere close. The 1953 body was still being sold a full decade later because there was never enough money to design a new one. The man who read that number most clearly was Byers Burlingame. Burlingame was the company's top finance man, a former Packard executive who understood a balance sheet far better than he understood a car. And when he looked at Studebaker, he did not see a heritage worth saving. He saw a business that was bleeding to death. The board chairman, Randolph Guthrie, said exactly that, in almost those words. They were being bled to death. So the board made its choice. Instead of pouring the profits from the little Lark, the compact car that had briefly saved the company, back into new automobiles, they poured them into completely different businesses: tractors, motor oil additives, generators. The one executive who had built the Lark and wanted to stay in the car business, Harold Churchill, was pushed aside. By 1962, cars were barely half of what Studebaker earned. The board had quietly decided that its real business was making money, and that building cars was no longer the best way to do it. Which brings us back to Gate 1 on that Monday in December. 7,000 people lost their jobs in South Bend that day. The announcement came just 17 days after President Kennedy was killed, while the flag over the plant was still flying at half staff, so it flew at half staff for Studebaker too. Local unemployment jumped from just over 2% to nearly 9% almost overnight. On paper, the board was not even wrong. The cars lost money. The break-even really was impossible. Any honest accountant would have told you the same thing Burlingame did. But an accountant's spreadsheet does not have a line for a 55-year-old man who gave that same factory 23 years of his life and then walked out through Gate 1 with nothing at all waiting on the other side. For years afterward, the local paper kept printing his kind of obituary. Former Studebaker worker, no cause of death listed. And then came the last betrayal, the one that outlived every man in that boardroom. When Studebaker closed, its pension fund did not have the money to pay what it had promised its workers. The oldest retirees were covered, but roughly 4,000 men in their 40s and 50s, men with decades on that line, received about 15 cents for every dollar they had earned in benefits. Thousands more got nothing at all. It became such a public scandal that Congress spent the next 11 years writing a federal law to make sure it could never happen to anyone again. Almost every private pension in America today is protected because of what was done to the men of South Bend. We did not lose Studebaker to Toyota. We did not lose it to a country that stopped wanting American cars. We lost it to a room full of men who decided the car business was not worth winning. And there is a company that proves the choice was real. American Motors faced the very same squeeze in the very same years. Another independent too small to fight the giants of Detroit head-on. But it found a corner of the market it could actually own. First, with small economy cars, and then with a rugged little machine it bought in 1970 called the Jeep. That one decision kept it alive for another 25 years. Jeep is still on the road today. Studebaker never found its corner. It found an exit instead. The last Studebaker was built on the 17th of March, 1966. Not even in South Bend, but in a plant across the border in Hamilton, Ontario, where the final cars were assembled after the American factory had already gone dark. It was a plain sedan, painted a pale turquoise. 114 years of building things for America, and it ended with one quiet car rolling off a line in another country. That car sits in a museum in South Bend today. Before we close, if this story found you, if you have been carrying a memory of one of these cars without quite knowing what to do with it, there are more stories like this one. Subscribe, and we will keep telling them. Stand at Gate 1 on Sample Street in South Bend today. The presses are gone. The floor where 24,000 people once built cars is a technology campus now, full of people who never heard the 6 o'clock whistle. Close your eyes and go back. Hear the presses coming down. Smell the cutting oil and the fresh lacquer off the paint line. Feel the weight of a bullet nose fender lifting off the press. See the workers walking out at the end of a shift into a town that a Studebaker paycheck had built. Now open your eyes. The whistle is silent. Studebaker kept its promise to America for 114 years. Its own boardroom could not keep its promise to the men who walked out through that gate.